Last year, after closing up my apartment in Madrid, I set out on a trip through my beloved homeland, Spain. It was a trip I shall never forget. I guess everyone in the world wants to know more about his own country. At least I always have. I wanted to become more familiar with the celebrations, festivals, art, and folklore. Not all of Spain is represented in this film, but in years to come, I hope to see a lot more of the beauty of my country. My first stop was Toledo. These gaunt faces, which have a somewhat melancholy look, belong to our forebears of the 16th century, when 100 years after the discovery of America, this country was part of the greatest empire on earth. Here, we see the chief personages of Toledo. They are attending the funeral of Count Orgaz, a famous nobleman of the city. The artist who painted this canvas was a Greek, and therefore called El Greco. He married a beautiful Spanish girl, and they had this son, who, in the course of time, became an architect in this city, a map of which he holds in his youthful hands. The city of Toledo has not changed a great deal since his time. In the shelter of its old walls, a multitude of handicrafts still linger on. And so it is with this old pottery studio, with its primitive foot-powered wheel and its clay kilns that provide a precise heat for the pottery. These beautiful and unique pieces, which are modeled and painted by hand, are sold in the marketplace that is located in the main square, a colorful gathering place for both the local people and tourists shopping for bargains. El Greco lived quite close to this market. He no doubt heard the shouting of its dealers from his dwelling. His house is still as it was then. Furniture, a few pictures, and some books are intended to evoke his life. Perhaps he sometimes stopped work when he heard the sound of these bells proclaiming a wedding, or the beginning of a new life, such as the one these peasants are about to celebrate as they meet for the baptism of a child. For nearly 8 centuries, the Spaniards repelled frequent Moorish invasions from Africa. These invasions periodically devastated the country. Born of a need for self-defense, rose such cities as Avila, a town of renowned saints and enlightened gentlefolk, totally surrounded by walls and a strong line of defense. These are the lands of Castile, situated approximately in the center of Spain, a region of cold winters and extremely hot summers. The Castilians, too, defended their homeland against the Moorish invaders, and with equal tenacity built their castles and fortresses. Some of these castles were constructed of stone, and others, due to the Moorish influence, were made of brick. Castile means land of castles, and each center, each small town, has its own castle. They no longer provide any defense, but are loved by the inhabitants just as if they were some aged kinsman, some forebear whose duty it still is to supervise the idling of the older people and the games of the children. one sees many typical dances throughout Spain. This one is called the Jota of Segovia. This particular dance is performed to simple primitive music, but its pattern and steps vary with the region. Further north, in the province of Navarre, is celebrated the festival of San Fermin. Every year, on the 7th of July, when the clock on the town hall in the city of Pamplona indicates 12 o'clock, His Honor the Mayor fires a signal into the air, and the big week begins. 7 wonderful days of clamor, music, and festivity. The town squares are filled. The whole city is out in the streets. Farmers, foreigners, and tourists from all over the world invade the city to witness a highlight of the festival, the running of the bulls. Every morning, the brave bulls that are to take part in the bullfighting contests that day are driven toward the main square from their corrals on the outskirts of the city. Their route traverses the town, and the young men joyfully participate in a skirmish of war which no military general in the world would condone. They flee before the enemy. This perilous game, in which the fruitless and heroic are combined with rare skill, yearly attracts an ever-growing number of Spaniards and foreigners, specialists in the San Fermin Marathon, a Spanish event of 5,000 crooked meters. Later, heifers afford a full outlet for any bullfighting aspirations a young man might have. Now, contrary to appearances, danger of injury is slight, as the animal has its horns padded to eliminate the possibility of anyone getting gored. The whole spectacle, which might have proven tragic in the morning, ends up by becoming an afternoon farce. Even though some of Spain's most famous bullfighters are signed up for the fights at Pamplona, it seems as though the people's minds are on other things. The whole city is obsessed with the noise, the music, dancing, obsessed with a real festival feeling. Ernest Hemingway wrote of this festival in his famous novel, The Sun Also Rises. Hemingway later returned to the city of Pamplona, no longer as an unknown, but as its official guest. The crowds welcomed him by surrounding him in their dancing, just as they dance around the famous festival giants fashioned out of cardboard and wood. The crowds dance in the streets, the bars, and their homes. Although they may drop from sheer exhaustion, the next morning the festivities begin afresh. This, then, is the festival of San Fermin. 7 days of glorious sunshine. 7 nights of revelry. A joyful celebration up in the extreme north of Spain. After their festivals, silence again reigns in the ancient cities of northern Spain. Cities like León and Salamanca lie quietly in the shadow of the old cathedrals. Here, time seems to stand still. French and Spanish masters decorated these portals with images of saints and prophets, with figures of kings who lived their lives right here amidst these surroundings. For here met death. One of the most famous cathedrals of Spain is in Burgos, the city where Castilian Spanish is spoken to greatest perfection. Its towers look out over plains that extend down to Segovia through the center of Spain. The people of this plain, in their need for defense, took advantage of the mountains and built their habitations and walls in inaccessible locations. On crossing this plain, one can see cities that have taken up their vantage point on every peak or at every junction of rivers where access is difficult. A good example of a fortress city may be found here at Cuenca, east of Madrid, whose houses, hanging above the abyss, as those of the entire city do, would seem to rest there through a mere whim of nature. The best preserved aqueducts of olden times remain as a token of the Roman domination of Spain. Built stone upon stone, they still stand without cement or mortar. The art of architecture in stone has been kept alive in Spain over the centuries, and it now flourishes in Salamanca and in Santiago de Compostela, a place famous for its pilgrimages and for its old university tradition. Here, just as in centuries past, students occasionally don the old traditional costumes, and with the music of their guitars, violins, mandolins, and tambourines resounding through the streets, they search out the balconies for señoritas to serenade. Here, long ago, lived a student who was very much like the youth you see here. He grew up to be a man who wrote a book that won him worldwide fame. The book was called Don Quixote de la Mancha, a satire on all the silly romances of that period. The author was named Miguel de Cervantes. Standing before these windmills, in the area that served as a setting for this famous novel, I found it hard to resist the temptation to bring back some reminder, even though a mere snapshot. So I took it and went on my way, south, to that region in Spain which enjoys the most renown, Andalusia. Of all the lands that the Moors ruled in Spain, their favorite region, and the one they embellished most with their art, was Andalusia. Granada was the last stronghold of the Moorish kings who ruled here from 711 until 1492. Seeing the palace of the Alhambra, its courtyards covered by arabesques repeating the name of Allah, and its fountains into which water from the Sierra flows, one can easily understand the nostalgia the Moors felt for these palaces once they had lost them. The author Washington Irving lived inside these walls a century ago. It was here that he wrote into his story the legends that had been accumulating here through the centuries. His book was entitled Tales of the Alhambra, and whoever has read it will relive the scenes of its pages on beholding this setting. While wandering through the little streets and alleys that lead down to the modern city, a person can sometimes hear the sound of a guitar playing the prelude to some dance. The flamenco dance of Andalusia has spread abroad, and having gained pupils throughout the world, has given rise to numerous schools and artists appearing on stages throughout the world. Spring finds the people of Andalusia and throughout Spain busy, preparing for Holy Week, a celebration commemorating the passion and death of Jesus Christ. Here in Sevilla, Holy Week is celebrated with extraordinary splendor. The statues are kept in churches and monasteries not far from the famous Cathedral of Sevilla, whose bell tower, the Giralda, is one of the loveliest in all of Spain. The processions begin at dawn. The Christ of the Gypsies, nicknamed the Cob, shows its agonized profile against the morning sky, while the drums give a deep roll at Triana Bridge. These statues are paraded throughout the day and night. Each confraternity or religious association carries its patron saint on its shoulders. This is heavy and tiring work because of the weight of the sculptures and the long winding route of the march. The men under the platform can see only a little strip of ground ahead of them, so are guided by a leader who directs them from the outside. When they can bear no more, the leader calls a halt. After a short rest, they are again underway. It is a long march when one considers the short steps the bearers have to take. The Virgin of La Macarena symbolizes the faith and devotion of all the people in Sevilla. Every year, people gather at her shrine to plead for grace, to give thanks for some favor granted, or simply because of religious devotion, an emotion that is sweeping all of Spain this week. After Holy Week, most of the tourists depart for the coast, where a monument commemorates the deeds of Christopher Columbus, right on the spot where he set out on his historic voyage to America. This area in southern Spain seems to awaken from its winter lethargy in preparation for the hundreds of visitors who will come here each summer. The towns of the Sierra, still white from past festivals, once more receive a cleansing coat of whitewash, which serves as one of their most decorative elements. In one of these towns, Ronda, there exists the oldest bull ring in all of Spain. Not far from the bridge that joins the old and new parts of the city, rises this circle of stone, where children demonstrate what great aficionados of the bullfighting sport they are by imitating the cape passes of the master toreadors. The bullfighting season begins with the April Fair. In the narrow confines surrounded by the spectators, horsemen and horsewomen promenade. Dressed in the traditional costume of the region, they show off their mounts which, with their fine bloodlines, perpetuate the Arabic tradition for fine horse racing. During the hours the fair is open each day, the city looks just as if the pages of history had been turned backward to the last years of the 18th century. That colorful and happy era has been perpetuated for us by Francisco de Goya, a Spanish painter whose canvases are shown in museums throughout the world. We see the works of one of the greatest geniuses of Spanish painting, Diego Velázquez. A contemporary of Rubens, he left Spain only twice in his lifetime and spent most of his time making portraits of the royal family. All of these famous works, as well as paintings by other celebrated artists, today hang in the Prado Museum in Madrid. Madrid, the capital city, is located in approximately the middle of the Spanish peninsula. It is a more residential type city rather than industrial. Situated at 2,000 feet above sea level, its 2 million inhabitants experience very cold winters, but in contrast, hot, dry summers. It is not a large city in the classical European sense. Its newer streets and recently built structures tend to give it a very modern look. Many reminders of the past still remain, such as the Royal Palace, which stands majestically in the outskirts of the city. A sculptural group, representing the civilization of the ancient world, stands in contrast to the gardens surrounding the buildings of University City, where students who will someday direct Spanish industry are trained. In the south, on the coast that faces Africa, are to be found the modern installations of escombreras, where petroleum is refined for all of Spain. As we go north toward Catalonia, this warm land, bathed by the Mediterranean Sea, becomes the most cosmopolitan tourist center of Spain. Tossa, whose castles still perpetuate the adventures of the Barbary pirates, is the capital of the Costa Brava, so named because of the abrupt beauty of its landscape, a landscape that is served as a setting for numerous motion pictures. Many camping groups have sprung up under the auspices of the international tourist movement. The sunshine and beautifully transparent water attract people from many latitudes to this region of rugged solitude. My trip ends in Barcelona, which is one of the major industrial and business cities of Spain. Spain, a nation that is erecting on its past a future, which the Spaniards of today desire to experience tomorrow.